Nau maira te hi te wehi te mana, nau maira ki tēnei kōrero ngā tūpuna e. Koutou ngā tūpuna e whakawhiti te moana nui a ki wae. Kia tae atu ki te tiri o te moana, te tae o ka pia e. Me mihi, me mihi, me mihi e. Nau maira e, whakatau maira e.
Ti he Māori o re karanga wairua tēnei ki ngā tūpuna hoki wairua mai ki te awhina tātou. Kau e warawara ki ngā whānau pani ki ngā mate kei wainga nui o tātou. E ki haere mate ki ngā tūpuna ki ngā kiingi. Haere ki roto te ringa te atua nā te atua tātou mana. Wai ne me hoki mai ki a tātou te wairua o te atua e pā. E karanga tēnei ki a koe, hana mai tata ki a tātou ki a mātou. Ko te me nui tō kaha tō wairua te aroha. Hei āwhina tātou i runga tēnei karanga. Mōria ki te atua maungarongo ki te whenua whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Ke tau, ke tātou katoa, te ata whai tō tātou riki ui Christ. Me te aroha ki te atua, me te whiwhita i tanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, amene, kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koe uncle, naui whakatau i a mātou, I roto I tēnei momo kaupapa. Me te me hoki he kanohi kōrua ko rōpata kei runga I tēnei momo mekini, hei kanohi o ngā tūpuna, o ngā tiraro, o te atiawa, me te tauihi o te waka Māori, tēnā koe. Tēnā tātou I te iwi I whakatau mai ki runga I tēnei momo marae, kia mātou ko Aimee, no Ngai Tahu, ko ia te māngai mō te tahi o ngā kōrero, no reira tēnā tātou katoa. Very warm welcome to you all who have joined us in this presentation that we have decided to call Tukuiho Tukuiho. And we like this because it's a sign of the continual recreation of knowledge from ancestors right down to all of the many diverse iwi, hapu iwi, whānau children, mokopuna that are before us today. And we seize this kōrero from our ancestors and pivot it to face the issues of the time. And so in our kōrero, we're going to speak to traditional stories from our respective areas, but also we want to see how we can leverage off those stories to creating climate change adaptation strategies for our people to face the future with confidence. This project, and I've got to do a plug here for all of the people who have supported the project, the marae of Te Awhina, the marae of Awarua and our extended whānau. We also had a researcher go to Rēkohu in the Chatham Islands, and because of the interest, we've also had a story reach us from Ngāti Hei. So all of you who have participated, the Kapahaka group, Motuika Mai Tāwhiti, and all your whānau, we want to acknowledge you, and also the Deep South Challenge, Vision Mātauranga project, who have kindly come on board to help fund this project. This project was funded because in our work with the Vision Mātauranga, it was really important for myself and for Aimee to get a sense of our relationship with what we were talking about, to make that connection between people and place. And the only way that we could do that was to look further into our stories. For Aimee, coming from Awarua Marae, Tamarereti was very familiar for her, and she'll talk about that story shortly. And for me, coming from Te Tauihu o Te Waka Māui, our marae, Te Awhina marae, has as its teko teko on the top a carving of Hui Te Rangiora. So that was some of the inspiration that projected this research, and also, as I said earlier, so we can not only understand our relationships, but we queried whether other Māori hapuiwi had similar stories or similar relationships, and indeed we found that they do. We think it's also important to synergise any adaptation strategy with Te Reo Māori and Tikanga Māori, because that's a way to engage our people. That's the way that we're going to get momentum when we talk about Māori not participating in various forums. We have to go, I guess, with those frameworks that are very quickly going to allow our people to engage. Now, in the earlier seminar, I was fascinated by Te Warahi Hitaraka's kōrero, let's just say kōrero, ona whakaaro, his thoughts, his words, his stories, and he talked about the Antarctica being on top. And I want us to think through what we see in a standard atlas. And that standard atlas certainly does not have our view of the world up there. So I invite you to consider and reframe our thinking and our paradigms, and to think of the Antarctica as indeed being on top of the world, but equally as importantly is to be able to look at Te Moana Nui a Kiwa rather than have it chopped off. And that also happens on a standard atlas with the Antarctica. It's just, sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not, just disappears off the world. And so we want to give it that importance. We also want to give Te Moana Nui a Kiwa the credibility, the visibility of, so that we all realise the vast expanse of the Pacific. And I think that when you see it like that, then we would understand how prolific navigation was throughout the Pacific, just right across the seas and the oceans, for many, many reasons, no one reason. Not only that, but also the abundance of life that we found in Te Moana Nui a Kiwa. We have so many stories of our people chasing whales, following octopuses, working with the dolphins, working in seasons with certain species, following the albatross. These are all of our examples of our arrival here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we have stories that tell us that our ancestors also traversed into the Antarctica and the Southern Oceans. What name they gave to it, we know not. But we do know through the stories that came back to us that they were there. And so in this association with the Antarctica, we're cementing ancient relationships between us as Māori, also being Pacific people, but also with place, and that place includes the Antarctica. And another ancient karakia that comes from Tainui is here in all its fullness of Māori language, and it's a very important ngiri, which is a form of haka to Tainui, and it is often performed at rituals and celebrations that honour navigation and waka navigation in particular. And this tells us the story of a taniwha, a supernatural being, somebody who existed, but this hui te rangiora was like a, I've forgotten the English word, but taniwha will do at the moment. And this supernatural being or taniwha had needle-like structures on its back, which pierced the sky and resembled the top of mountain ranges, so that the mountain ranges lie like a sleeping taniwha. And this ngiri tells the story of Hui te Rangiora making her way to the Antarctica and is resting there still, but in the form of a taniwha. This story has been preserved by Ngāti Rārua and Tainui. As the migrations of the people were made, the story also went with them. And so again, this is another association through ngiri, through the continuation and the handing down of knowledge through this process that we're calling tukuiho, tukuiho. So turning now to the story of Hui Te Rangiora, and up the top there he is in his finest of glory, adorning the wharenui of Te Awhina Marae and Motueka, with a gaze firmly fixed on the horizon, because that's what navigators do, right? They have their gaze firmly set on the horizon, completely trusting in the confidence to navigate the seas, the oceans, whatever pathway would be chosen, and to make decisions about that. And also below is another cultural symbol of Hui Te Rangiora. This is a bit further than the marae. This is at the Riuwaka Resurgence. And in the Riuwaka Resurgence is the place of ancient waters. And after Hui Te Rangiora journeyed down to the Antarctic oceans, he came back. There's a wahi tapu where the waka pulled in. He found his way so that he could rest and bathe in these ancient waters. And so these also are a tribute to that particular journey that he undertook. And some of the stories that came back and are still with Ngāti Rārua are that these stories tell of the female that dwells in the mountainous waves, whose tresses wave about in the waters and on the surface of the sea, and the frozen sea of Pia, with that deceitful animal of that sea who dives to great depths, a foggy, misty and dark place, not seen by the sun. And that's just a small excerpt of the stories that came back. And, you know, we're very good as Māori in personifying and giving life to lots of these geographical indicators that are in our territories. And so we make these connections really, really easy. And the talk goes about the bare rocks that grow out of that frozen sea. And also that when the sea, the sea and the ocean at a certain point reminded Hui Te Rangiora of arrowroot. And so the word huka came to us, and that's why it's called the tides of arrowroot that are amongst the froth, Te Tai Uka Apia. So for Ngāti Rārua, this is the story, and this is the name that we give the Antarctica, Te Tai Uka Apia. The story also comes from Polynesia, and in Polynesia, in the Cook Islands, he is known as Ui Te Rangiora. And it has a lot of significance, not only because of the story of navigation, but also because there are many wharenui or meeting houses throughout the country called Hui Te Rangiora, and there are many places. And so for Ngāti Rārua, we've been trying to piece together the association of the navigator with the place, with the meeting houses as well. And, you know, we find that they all marry up, because one of the stories that we've learned is that Hui Te Rangiora was actually the name of the first meeting house, so that all these celestial knowledge could be contained in the house. And you went into the house to wānanga about this knowledge and use this knowledge to guide on the way. We're going to watch a little video later with Iropata Stevens, who's going to, we managed to catch a snippet of his kōrero that we'll share later. But I'm going to pass over to Aimee now to talk about her story of Tamariri.
Tēnā tātou whānau. So this screen at the top, we have my marae Te Rawaroha here in Bluff. The background behind me is our wharekai Te Rawaroha, and Tamariri features quite significantly through a lot of our whānau kōrero, and especially in our marae. So there is kōrero around Tamarereti being the great navigator and the great explorer who ventured down to Te Tiri o Te Moana to Antarctica. It talks about Tamarereti, the atua or the deity, and how the tragedy that struck Tamarereti, his crew and his waka on their journey home from Antarctica, which then became the formation of the stars, landscapes and seascapes that we make reference to today here in Murihuku, here in Southland. So the wharekai, the background behind me, the mahi toi on the ceiling, this depicts the Māori astronomy relevant to here, to this place. So we have the Aurora Australis, so ngā kurakura o Hene Nui Te Pō, and also the Southern Lights or the Milky Way, which is Te Waka or Tamarereti. We also have reference of Tamarereti in other places that are relevant to Ngaitahu. So our Ngaitahu seafood plant here in Bluff even has two po at the front, at the main entrance of their plant. And these signify the kaitiaki of the Southern Oceans. So we have Tamarereti and Te Moana Tāpokopoko a Tāwhaki. And we also have one of our kai kōrero, Bubba Thompson. He has recreated the pūrākau of Tamarereti in his venture to Antarctica. And he's written this as a children's book in both Te Reo Māori and in English. His original intent of the book was to share with Tamariki what Tamarereti and his crew must have felt, seen, smelt on their journey down to Antarctica, and he hopes to inspire that imagination of what the deep sea and the deep south and Antarctica is like. Through this research process, Baba has said that his original intent wasn't to inspire kōrero or whakaro around climate change, but he can now see the relevance and how strong a figure such as Tamarereti can be to inspire thought, and for tamariki to start thinking about climate change and making the linkage between our mytho-historical atua and our environment today. I think what was also quite significant about our process, the research process with our whānau down here in the south, was we based it predominantly on collective whānau knowledge and utilising the narratives that we have within our marae that we see every day, place names, seascapes that we have. It's all quite important linking it together. Yeah, it's been an interesting process, quite different to other research processes and interviews that we have done in the past, but we've had a really good response from whānau, and we are looking forward to further research going forward.
Ka pai, Aimee, kia ora. I just want to acknowledge that we saw a raised hand come through. I think that if we can just hold off, and after the presentation we'll bring Billy back on and we'll look at what are some of the questions and issues being raised. But hopefully you don't mind if we continue on the presentation first. So just gathering that kōrero from what Aimee and I have said about our illustrious ancestors and their journeys down to the Antarctica and the Southern Oceans that are still very much encoded within our whakapapa and our coming through all the many generations, visualized in some instances, but held orally in many other instances. When we talked about kind of pivoting then to see how they can inform climate change adaptation strategies, then they all really go back our kōrero. You know, people call that data from a scientific method. We just call it kōrero. People call it mātauranga. We still just call it kōrero and whakaaro. But it all goes back to atuatanga. And it all goes back to our Māori concepts of our Māori world that is still very, very much relevant in practice today in Te Ao Māori. So they're not your usual adaptation strategies. We don't have a list of places where there's particular flooding happening right now, even though we know that it's happening. But when we talk to our people about how then to look forward with the future lens, then we found that what they were saying fitted into these categories that we've got up here now. And we heard these messages in the earlier seminar as well. So I'm just going to kind of quote what some of our people said under some of these headings and Te Tauihu, and then Aimee will talk more about some central quotes and kōrero from her, from Awaru and from Ngaitahu. So just to reaffirm, as I said, that in the end it's about the atua, Ranginui and Papatuānuku and all of their children that have domain over various spheres of the universe. And that is that we are the ocean and the ocean is us. We are the Y and the Y is us. We are the land and the land is us. And the sooner that we make that reconnection in a very genuine and authentic way back to the natural world, then that is the most effective way to be able to address climate change. And that's, you know, that's about spirituality as well. That's acknowledging that we're also spiritual beings. That's acknowledging the relationship that exists between all the living beings within the Antarctica and the Southern Oceans, because all of the atua are present. When we look at whakapapa, these stories are what make us. We are made up of these stories. Pākehā call it DNA, we call it whakapapa. These stories are in us and they come through us to create an attitude of curiosity and inquiry. Our tupuna had very naturally the engagement with the natural world. They learned all these skills, passed on the knowledge. And why? Because if you didn't, you probably wouldn't survive. And it is really important that young people have these stories of excellence drawing from our ancestors, so that it sparks and ignites that interest, not only about the stories, but how to balance that with the world of today, and that our people were in continual pursuit of knowledge. When it comes to whenua and moana, that goes back, of course, to kaitiaki, and that comes back to that relationship. And Māori had a huge intellectual capacity on the world around them. And again, it's about those natural resources and monitoring and being very, very careful of our own consumption. And it's also that link back to whānau, because if any of parts of the environment are polluted, then we won't sustain the well-being of our whānau. And looking towards whānau, both Aimee and I did spend time concentrating and working on engaging with young people, and we've got an example of that a little later on. But it's also about individual entitlement versus collective entitlement for the good of humanity. And that is going to be really, really significant. As one of my people said, Māori are in a good place to do this. We understand it, we use it, and we can focus, and we do focus our resources on improving the life of our communities, extending to making important future decisions on climate change. And Aimee, you've got some to add in?
Yes, so from our whānau kōrero down here in the south, related to Wairua and whakapapa, it's not dissimilar to what Sandy has just shared from the kōrero from Te Tauihu. Southern runaka and whānau reference our earth living ecosystems to ki uta, ki tai, ki te tere o te moana. So all living ecosystems are connected from the mountains, through the waterways, to the sea, down to the southern oceans, and vice versa. And all are reliant on each other to survive. So when we look at whenua and moana in our adaptation strategy framework, kai resource was a very strong discussion point for our whānau down here. For many years, there has been a lot of mahi and research around mahinga kai and climate change and the impacts. However, whānau acknowledge that there is a lot more work to be done, and especially for our tamariki and rangatahi going forward. So our kai resources from both land and sea are an important source of our wellbeing. And for many, these kai resources provide not only sustenance, but also our livelihoods. So whether it be mutton birding, fishing, or diving. And through this vocation and mahinga kai, what whānau have observed over recent decades is the changing environment, and specifically the sea temperature and sea level rise. And with this, whānau have observed ecosystem changes and the impacts that these have on our resources. So from here, the strategies with whānau have identified that tamariki could potentially be an atua climate change maker. There's been a suggestion around wānanga to design and develop a tamariki climate change resource for tamariki. Acknowledging tamariki are our climate change makers of the future. A key pātai for whānau that has also emerged is what does a collective tribal whānau and hapu response to climate change look like? We have the Ngāi Tahu climate change strategy, which provides an excellent foundation for our people, runaka and hapu, to develop their own responses. And with this, whānau feel that it is important that the whole community are engaged in adaptation responses. The strategy must include whānau kōrero, our own narratives, science, new evidence, whānau anecdotal evidence, and ongoing monitoring of our land, our seascapes, and our resources. One interesting quote we have received from a kaumātua was, our environment will dictate our tribal wellbeing and economies going forward. Therefore, it is important climate change kōrero is part of the agenda at every tribal hui and context, and part of our everyday whānau language.
Hi, kia ora, Aimee. I'm just going to play a short video, and this is with Rōpata Stevens talking, and then we've introduced Pohe, who has been nurturing young children into the Kapaka group of Motueka Mai Tāwhiti, and they've been singing stories about hui te rangiora. So hopefully this is just going to work if I can find my icon. There we go.
In Aotearoa, he is, hui te rangiora is revered as one of those masters of navigation, master mariner, and he came our way. We've acknowledged him. We now sing about him. We compose waiata about him. We have children singing those waiata to remember him. So he's quite special.
Like a Puitirangi order was to go down there now, and he realises that the ice is melting and that this blanket around the earth is wrapped around tightly so that the gases can't get out. What would Puitirangi order do? Put some holes in that blanket? How would he put some holes in that blanket?
I runga I te mea ko Puitirangi Ora te tangata tuatahi kia pai atu ki reira, a ki te kōpai tonga, tai huka pia. He whakahira-tanga tēnā honua kia mātou I runga no I te kaitiakitanga. I runga tonu I te mea mātou te mana whenua pē. I taunaha te ai te rā wāhi. No reira. Ngoi nei tamariki, kia mōhio rāno, kia whakairohia rāno e rā kōrero ki roto ki a rātou. Ka mōhio rātou ki te hiranga o tēnei mea te climate change. I roto I te kaitiakitanga, I te tirohanga a te kaitiaki ki tana taiao, I tana ao whānui.
So just to pick up on that, and I must say, it wasn't my best performance with 5-year-olds to 12-year-olds. I actually was expecting a older age group, and so it's a really bad presentation. But if you get the spirit of what was happening, the spirit of what was happening was to start working with our youth in terms of Huiterangi Ora as our ancestor, and as Kohe said in Te Reo Māori, to make them alert and conscious of this world that we're living in, so that they will be prepared to make future decisions. And you know, as with all our work in Te Ao Māori and with our whānau and hapu, research generally starts here and ends there, but of course this is an ongoing life commitment. One is obviously because of the importance of climate change that we have, but for Aimee and I, it doesn't have an end date, because we work with our people all the time, right? We give back. There's this spirit of reciprocity in which we work, and so there's no ending point. So we'll be carrying on working in our respective whānau groups and across the many manifestations of what that looks like, be it with kapahaka or children, be it with the school groups, be it with working with environmental managers. We have, you know, the tentacles of knowledge must go out. And so I guess our summary slide is just to remind us, and for Māori, this, you know, this isn't new, but we are committed through climate change adaptation strategies to ensuring that they're holistic, that they're grounded in our atua, and that we're continually reminded of that, because in the end it's about being good guardians of our environment, and that synergy. Actually, just a smaller point, when I asked the question about what would Huiterangi Ora would do, one of the children said that he would make holes in the blanket so that you know, so that the poisonous gases could escape, and that would help Papatuānuku. So, you know, we're framing these strategies in our own language and our tikanga, and that should be the base of all of our strategies moving forward. Because why? Because they also impact on our whānau, hapu and iwi well-being. We are the universe, and the universe is us. Nō reira, tēnā anō ngā mahi kia koutou I whakarongo ana ki māua ko Aimee I roto I tēnei kaupapa, ngā mahi. So we're going to go over to questions, and I'm going to stop the share and ask Billy to come back on, because I didn't give him a chance in the beginning to explain what would happen. So maybe if you did that first, Billy, and then Aimee and I can have a look at the questions.
Yeah, kia ora whaia, all good. Kia ora tātou, Billy Van Utrecht, tōku ingoa. Yeah, so just to introduce the broader seminar series, we've had one already earlier today, which you all would have received an invite to as well. And this is the second in that. So we're just asking everybody with questions, just pop them up in the Q&A panel. And then that allows other people to see your questions and to vote them up as well. Yeah, so the idea is that this seminar series is kind of like the initial phase where we're starting a conversation. It might feel a little bit one way through this mechanism. So we've got a wānanga plan for Hapu and Iwi to come and join in a couple of weeks, and that's where the conversation will really become two ways. So these seminars will be recorded and embedded on the website for Hapu and Iwi to go away and engage with them on their own, and then come back really well informed for the wānanga that we have to follow in a couple of weeks. So we've had about 170 registrations. So the good thing is that everyone is super keen on this kaupapa and keen to join in the conversation. So if anybody has any questions, just pop them up in the Q&A while I'm speaking.
I've got one there, Billy. So Charles,
yeah.
Is there a specific phenomenon or legacy that the kaitiaki of the Southern Oceans are meant to protect? Great question, Charles. And, you know, it really depends on which hapu and iwi you come from, because for some, they may have a closer association with the whales. Others might have a closer association with the octopus. That's in terms of some of the marine diversity, animal bird life diversity. But into the land itself, then I would say that the legacy to protect is the natural world, you know, and all its vastness. And maybe that's not specific, but I don't think it has to be specific. I think that in Te Taiao and in the Antarctica, we know that it is absolutely brimming with life. Rangi hura here, ko wai te waka o te tupuna nei, hui te rangi ora. Okay, ka pai rangi hura here. That is te iwi o Atia, so the bones of Atia. And there's a story about that, because depending on who you read, of course, but e ai ki te kōrero, hui te rangi ora's waka was partly built out of the bones of the people that he defeated, you know, as a kind of, abuse is the wrong word, but denigration of the people who were defeated. So that's the name of the waka. And I will go down. You've got lots of questions that I'm going to hear. You could have come down and had a cup of tea with me. I know this is the key. Let me just move up that link. Okay, that was for haki. Well, ngā mahi kia kōrua mo era pātai. We've got, oh yeah, we've answered those. Let us go to chat now. And oh, Ian, yeah, I'm not quite sure if you're still there. Okay, well, that must be all our questions.
I had a question for you. Whaia, I have a question for you, actually.
All right.
That's cool. I was just wondering, I've heard about the voyaging of Hui Te Rangi Ora before, and I'm keen to know whether there's any talk about recreating or trying to recreate the voyage at all.
Mm.
Have you heard any of that sort of conversation?
Is this like physically recreating?
Yeah. Because I've seen on one of the maps, they've actually drawn a line, and I was like, how do we know where that line is?
Yes. Well, you know, that's, firstly, it's not a line, right? Because we go in lines, right?
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, not in the fullness of the seriousness of what that would entail would be my best response.
Yeah.
And yeah, everything would have to line up, but you know, but what an amazing kind of initiative. we have talked about it with others about making interactive tools to retrace the journey so that children can engage speedily and quickly, but the navigation itself. But Haki's on here at the moment, and this is his expertise as well as others as well. So, you know, you might have planted the seed for him anyway. Cool. And rangi hurahia ngā wahine runga o te waka. Well, I've got a guess of the people who were on there. I could be completely wrong. I've got as a guess that he would have had his two brothers on there, and I've just forgotten their names. Whenua Haere was the younger brother, named after because he moved, you know, with the land. But I'm pretty certain that there weren't any women there. So yeah, I've got a couple of other names that we can talk about a little later anyway. And for Kelly, maybe we have come across Rākai Hautu of the Urua Waka that landed at Wakatu. Yes, we very definitely have. But what I can say is that all of these ancestors and all of these kōrero have stories to guide, inform us, and help us face the future together. So in our case, Aimee used tamariri, I used hui te rangiora, and those are just one singular manifestation of the array of taniwha and other ancestors and tohu that exists. So yeah, so that would be my response to that, but very definitely we know about the Rākai Hautu. And another, Haka, you and Rangihuri should be sitting down here with me. E hoi anō. There was a question, I've just missed it, sorry. I'll come back to it, but I'll look at David from Antarctic office. Kia ora, David. Yes, tamariri. Yes, Aimee, be happy to give you a lesson. We're down there soon. And you've actually got a picture of Hui Te Rangiora that someone painted in your Christchurch office that I've seen as well. So it was good to see that when I visited. So we look forward to meeting you, David. And was there a question from Haki? Oh, they can't join us because they're at a wānanga. Kei te pai, there was a question about technology. Sorry, I just can't find it.
Kia ora, Sandy. I'll just chip in here. So kia ora koutou katoa. There's a beautiful question here from Whare Kauri. I'm curious to find, did you find any kōrero from our motu around the Chathams?
Yes, thank you for picking up on that question. Yes, we did. And they came in what I call parcels of history of memory that help us to create what was possibly a coherent picture. And so there's a couple of small stories. One is about chasing all the icebergs to make this pristine tea so that you could drink Antarctica tea. And then there's some other stories about the oh look, I've forgotten a lot, but we do have a dedicated part in our report, particularly to the people from Rēkohu, because of that. What we see as being the close association that they were. That there were things happening in the Chathams, and with Ngāti Mutunga being there and occupying part of the Auckland Islands as well. You know, we've heard about some of those stories of the Moriori and Ngāti Mutunga living down there, and so that's covered a lot more depth. And I think just in terms of their immense vulnerability to climate change and how to be able to manage that with some of their kōrero shared with us. So I'm sorry I can't answer in full. We had one of your whānau He was at this university and we worked with him on a scholarship so that mainly he could go home, and two, we could try and see what was these parcels of history that have been left behind.
So Sandy, just while you're looking at these questions, I can see the chat lines running hot. Just to remind people, if you have burning questions that you want to ask that come to you after the session, please feel free to email them to our website and we can pass them on and post up any responses that we have. So don't despair if your question isn't answered right here and now. We can make sure that we can find some responses for you for the website.
Thanks, Priscilla. So, Aimee, here's a question about 7 names for icebergs from Stewart Island. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, and I don't have it with me to share, but we can potentially share it on the DSC website.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of kōrero around the naming of maunga down in the south and related to the Antarctic. We can gather that information.
And just
where is the specific question?
On chat. And just
okay, kapai.
Just also to add into that, there are Polynesian words that spoke about the degrees of congealed ice. And so, and so who's to say that, and this word comes from Tonga, and so from some of the people I've been talking to, that the Tongans have also travelled down there because they had words to talk about these stories as well. I think it was taifatu is the word. Okay, well, I think, yeah, that's all our questions answered. So is that all right, Billy and Priscilla, if we kind of do our winding up?
Yeah, sure. I'd just like to remind everybody that tomorrow we have Dan Hikuroa speaking at 1 p.m. About Antarctic science and mātauranga. How do we bring Tao Māori into thinking about the Antarctic science that's going on? I think lots of people will be interested in that. Then we have Pete Russell speaking at 3 p.m. and he's going to be talking about sea ice melt and Antarctic ice melt and sea level rise. So really awesome kōrero for tomorrow. If everyone can sign up, you'll get a link for each specific seminar, so it's not just one big one. And I will send them through tomorrow, so we can all join in on that kaupapa as well.
Kia ora, Billy. Ka nui ngā mihi ki a koe, ki a tātou, I hui mai, I whakarongo mai, I whakaputi ngā hua, mō tēnei mō kōrero. And while I didn't show our last slide again, it was just to go back to our people, our whānau, of whom we're part of, just once again to thank them very much for their participation. And I'm just going to check if my uncle still managed to stay on. Uncle, are you there?
I'm still here. I just enjoyed the kōrero about Tui Te Rangi Ora, ne? I mean, I give thanks to Ropata if he's still here somewhere, because he was the man promoting the idea of building this whare in Motueka. And to have a name like that on top, it shows you his Māori, I suppose, is with us today. I had the opportunity to be part of the opening of that whare, and the kingitanga came down from Waikato, John Haunui and his ropu, and was there when the karanga came, and something happened. This whetū, the shooting star, just shot over the top of Te Rangi Ora and lit the whole place up. Now, A lot of you might know that, but I was part of the Karanga group from the Manuhiri side. Yeah. Just a little few words of love to your team there, Sandy. And I thank you from the Deep South. What's your name there?
Kia ora.
Hi, kia ora, hine. Kei here tō marae. Is your marae up on a hill or what? I've been down there.
It needs to be higher. No, we're not too high. We down the bottom of the hill.
Oh, I see. Because I went to a marae down there that was on a bit of a rise. And I don't know what the name of it, but I just want to thank you for your kōrero from the deepest, from the deeper south, really. Because, I mean, you'll have your kōrero. I'm sitting here in Maniapoto, and I know I've just heard Dan's going to be speaking tomorrow. Dan's, well, he's based in Auckland if he's still there, but he's from my tribe here in Maniapoto. And, but I just want to thank everybody, just listening to this kōrero about this tupuna that's on our whare. I know there's another huitirangi ora in Hamilton, I believe, and I don't know what the history there and what they are talking about. Did you know that, Sandy?
Yes, Uncle, and and that's why, as I said, that it was a name given to the first meeting house constructed on Earth, apparently, to bring in those heavenly knowledge. And apparently, Huitirangi Ora, the navigator, was named after that whare as well.
Oh.
Yeah.
Anyhow, thank you for the afternoon. I've enjoyed just listening to the history, really. And we're talking about parts of the history of Ranginui and Papatuanuk. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Uncle. Would you like to close us with karakia?
O me mihi tēnei ki a tātou I hara mai ki te kōrero pāna ki ngā kaupapa ki te taonga nei o Huitirangi Ora me ona tikanga me ona kawa. Whene karanga wairua ki tō tātou matunui tēnā. He whakawhetai kia koe e pā. He manaki tēnei tātou I runga te karanga o te kōrero mo tēnei rā. O pe hoki tēnei kia koe, kia tau kia tātou katoa. Tia te whai tō tātou riki o Ihu Christ. Me te aroha ki te atua. Me te whiwhita I tanga ki te wairua tapu a ke amene. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Hei kuna.